Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elina Akselrud. I'm a pianist, the lead artist and director of Intertwining Arts, a group that creates multi- and cross-disciplinary artistic projects. And today I'm presenting on the topic of interpreting late Scriabin through multimodal perception in cross-disciplinary performance. At the dawn of the 20th century, composer Alexander Scriabin declared that the future of art was an omni-art, a single tempestuous act in which sound, color, light, movement, scent, and even taste would unite together and elevate humanity, artistically and spiritually. He has written several majestic symphonic works, one of which, Prometheus, the Poem of Fire, Opus 60, in fact, includes a double light counterpoint. He had further plans for a 7-day-long omni-artistic work, Mysterium, but even the score did not see the world due to his sudden passing. Even though he envisioned grandiose artistic synthesis, most of his legacy is for solo piano. What is worth attention, however, is that in his later works, he has been writing non-musical, but rather poetic and dramatic indications in the score, which was not a common practice for composers, at least before and during his time. My objective in this research has been to investigate how cross-disciplinary collaboration can reshape pianistic interpretation, and Scriabin's late piano works, with their poetic and symbolic indications, provide an ideal ground for this exploration. I will present the trajectory of my work through my experimentation theory and methodology in 2 practice-based case studies and dive into several video examples. Scriabin left lots of evidence in his late works. From 1906 onwards, he annotates his scores with words such as étincelant, sparkling, or mystérieusement murmuré, mysteriously murmured. He assigns colors to keys. According to his biographers, he speaks of wicked bells in Sonata No. 6, evil forces in Sonata No. 9, and dazzling light in Sonata No. 10, as well as a slippery and slimy insect-like character of his enigma, Opus 52, that evolves into étrangeté, strangeness, Opus 63, and the song dance of the fallen walking on corpses in Flamme Sombre, the dark flames, Opus 73. So his late piano works are not quite neutral. They arrive preloaded with color tone mappings that invite lighting design, body-centered directions that beg for choreo movement response, archetypal and symbolic subplots, nightmares, ecstasies, transfigurations that have a profound meaning extending far beyond the theatrical layer. Put bluntly, Scriabin's music is already performance art in itself that makes a great incentive for testing how cross-modal feedback rewrites a performer's decisions. I entered this repertoire with one ground rule: the score is a platform and not a limiting frame. Its data, notes, rests, dynamics are stable, but my relationship to them and the extent to which they go to precisely are negotiated moment to moment with the other media on stage. So how does intermediality affect the pianist's interpretive decisions during rehearsal and performance? In what ways can intermodal exchange with dance, light, space, scent, or installations enhance a performer's perception of structure, character, and symbolism in Scriabin's music? What sensory, cognitive, interpersonal, and potentially psychological processes unfold in cross-disciplinary collaborations that contribute to expanded artistic interpretation? I'm looking for observable changes in rubato, timbral aspects, qualities of the phrasing, pedaling, chordal nuances, even formal hearing. I argue that interpretation is enhanced when it is introduced in a cross-disciplinary setting. Due to a simultaneous appearance of multiple artistic perspectives, this outcome is evident in the dynamic interplay of sensory stimuli that led me to explore new creative responses shaped by the intermedial dialogue and the intensified sensory environment. This work contributes to the field of artistic research and performance studies by examining the impact of cross-disciplinary collaboration on musical interpretation. Of course, interpretation is more than the sum of its parts. However, it does consist of various aspects. I would like to briefly show you how I categorize these. Please note that aspects such as melody and harmony are not present in the diagram. This is on purpose, as they are not supposed to be altered in the classical repertoire. In other words, if I, as a pianist, receive real-time multisensory feedback from collaborating artists, then my interpretive palette, especially timing, tone color, gestural treatment of the material, articulation, and a semantic understanding will expand, and new structural meanings will surface that are unreachable through solo work alone. To test this argument and to derive results, I followed steps that have formed my practice-led protocol. I practiced the works solo, studied historical sources in regard to the surrounding atmosphere, semantics, plot, and character that the composer embedded into the material. I observed internal cross-modal responses and took notes, performed solo on stage, and made solo piano recordings. I exchanged with each collaborator separately first, sharing ideas derived from the score and additional biographical or scholarly sources to construct a base upon which we would make interpersonal artistic connections. We met during individual tryout sessions to test the workflow. I organized live tryout and discussion sessions for the entire group simultaneously, recorded, filmed on multicam video, went through the sensations and phenomena experienced or derived. Then I entered the state of stimulated recall sessions, watched the footage, selected the most prominent takes, analyzed and categorized various types of phenomena or entanglements thereof, displaying or describing interpretive micro-decisions, bodily sensations, clashes of opinions, or new conceptual paths of understanding that appeared as a result of the collaborative work. I coded those examples and descriptions to extract phenomena categories and cross-relations between the different media. I constantly took autoethnographic field notes. In this study, I used an evocative form of autoethnography narrowly, tracking my own sensory, imaginal, and cross-modal responses during solo practice sessions, as well as during intermediate collaborations, rather than the broader socio-cultural identity work typical of critical autoethnography. This approach let me record my immediate associations, imagery, and internal plots as they emerged in performance and dialogue throughout solo practice and immediately after group work. My team and I created the artistic and documentary films, as well as performed live in a cross-disciplinary context. I subsequently dissected the phenomena observed in the films and performance videos, this time from a purely pianistic point of view, however, with newer layers of enhanced background in regard to the context, semantics, and intermodal exchange that happened during the practice-led research sessions and stage performances. Let's turn to case study 1, Vers le mystère, or Towards the Mystery. Piano and Contemporary Dance Improvisation, a study of 20 Scriabin character miniatures in a cross-disciplinary setting, a live stage performance, and a documentary representing the project from all the various angles for an in-depth view, research, experimentation, performance, and discussion. I was lucky to be joined by a very open-minded and improvising dancer, a movement explorer and researcher, Leia Orosz, and we tackled a variety of topics and phenomena together. These are the time, space, gesture, nonverbal communication, work with imagery and characters by elaborating on the title of the piece, boundaries, micro-movement, among others. I only have the time to present one example, so let's dive into it. Watching Leia made the music acquire a new temporal sense for me. As Mariusz Kozak claims, I quote, "Enacted time is not perceived, rather it is experienced. The body of the agent is central to its emergence," I close the quote. I can only confirm that the time in the pianistic interpretation acquires a very different meaning due to the cross-medial interpersonal experience. I'm presenting the closing section of Guirlande, Opus 73, number 1, as an example of how the last rolled chord was temporarily led by Leia's movement. I certainly do have more examples from this case study that I would be glad to show during the Q&A session in case of further interest. However, I must now move on due to the temporal constraints. Now I would like to continue with the case study number 2, the Scriabin Sonatas Reimagined, Part 2, encompassing the late 5 piano sonatas, numbers 6 through 10, and 5 genres: music, dance, colored light, installations, and olfaction. We have created the cinematic version of the project in 2 parts. The first one is an award-winning artistic film presenting a through-composed cinematic performance of the 5 late sonatas. It integrates music, dance, light, fog, installations, and multicam video to capture the full experience. The second is a feature-length documentary that delves into the phenomena explored during the project, offering detailed discussions, tryouts, and examples to provide a deeper understanding of the artistic research process and its outcomes. The project is not a historical reconstruction of Scriabin's ideas, but a contemporary exploration of how cross-disciplinary collaboration reshapes pianistic interpretation. The performance iteration took place on February 29, 2024 at the George Ligeti Saal, Mumut, with the inclusion of the olfactory component. My examples present a number of intertwining phenomena, so not just the art. I will briefly display the tables that present the cross-modal background of the 5 late sonatas, as well as those with the phenomena I have observed during my sessions of stimulated recall. The classification has facilitated the overall organization, comprehension, and assessment of my research findings, or identifying their absence in order to shed light onto the quintessential question: how can artistic musical interpretation evolve when it is part of a cross-disciplinary collaboration? These aspects could as well serve as topics of discussion and exploration for other projects in a similar expanded crossover setting. Let's delve into the examples that present phenomena in multiple genres, so I will outline the main ones and proceed to showing you the videos. The installations created by stage designer Yu Neizhang symbolize different concepts and purposes within each sonata. They were conceived as abstract, non-theatrical structures, light yet sturdy, portable and versatile, that could be carried, climbed into, or danced inside. Beyond their symbolic role, they also acted as obstacles and spatial markers, dark wooden bars crossed with strings in 3 dimensions, reflecting light and shaping different trajectories or entities depending on their arrangement. They could be clustered together, forming a corridor or a pathway, as seen in Sonata number 10, or separated to almost become characters, as observed in the Sonata number 9, respectively. Their use as symbols was evident in Sonata number 8. Leia's interaction with them was awe-inspiring. She crawled underneath, through or pushed them and carried them around. At one point, she brought one of these structures towards me while I was playing, immediately altering my perception of the space. During Sonata number 8, I became acutely aware of the installations when one of them was mere centimeters from me. They possessed a unique ability to adapt and transform the space according to our needs and Leia's interpretation of the characters and symbolism. The example will follow in a few moments. I worked with the lighting artists duo, Ninja Guru Studio, on the lighting design, and we delved into the symbolic meanings and emotional resonances linked to these colors, drawing inspiration from Scriabin's cross-model perceptions. In Sonata number 8, the key color was green, and the addition of warm flickers of orange complemented the cool green, constructing a nuanced emotional landscape. This was not initially planned, but I felt that the atmosphere with the addition of a warmer shade helped me play, so I chose to keep it. In Sonata number 6, the deep violet hues and an enveloping mist profoundly metamorphoses the spatial atmosphere. Playing this somber piece, never performed by Scriabin himself under such conditions, elicited a cascade of personal associations, imagery, and sensations, profoundly influencing my artistic and personal approach to the work. Gestures evolved into a seamless loop, transferring influence between different genres. My musical gestures and Leia's movement responded to each other, and those responses served as incentives for the upcoming ones, whether audible or visual. The dancer's subtle nods, arm and hand waves, and head turns have clearly made a significant impact on my interpretational decisions, while she has reacted to what she has heard. The tempo, the energy, the dynamics, the attack and takeoff of a note or a chord, and the relationship between different parts of the pianistic texture and the polyphony, the melody, the bass, the motifs, the rests, and how they're executed by me made an impact on her. Therefore, Leia not only performed the piece by shaping bodily movements in this space, however, she also has partly formed the musical performance, creating a profound artistic bond between us. I must state that her influence on my performance is absolutely unavoidable in such close quarters. Kozak emphasizes this cognitive dimension, saying that, I quote, "Kinesthetic knowledge is thus no mere physical knowledge. There is rationality in movement. Kinesthetic knowledge is cognition itself." I close the quote. This cognitive understanding of bodily movement underscores the critical importance of the dancer's presence, whose embodied interpretations become an essential aspect of my pianistic decision-making. And I have a fragment of the exposition of Sonata number 8. The symbolic layers of Scriabin's music have given me the courage to take greater interpretational risks. As Marcio Stoernagel writes, I quote, "Where there is a possibility of failure, there is also a possibility of success. Risk is exciting," I close the quote. I would like to add that when an interpretational choice springs from a deep personal understanding of the music's meaning, even drastic, unconventional variants feel justified and inevitable. When these bold decisions are woven into the work structure, its harmony, formal logic, dramatic flow, they stop feeling arbitrary and begin to make artistic and emotional sense. This shift also marked a larger transformation for me, moving away from projecting a preconceived interpretation toward cultivating an openness to spontaneous dialogical responsiveness within cross-disciplinary collaboration, a difference that reaches beyond personal growth to reshape the very framework of interpretation itself. In his late works, Scriabin often evokes vertiginous dances, ecstatic spinning rituals that end in collapse and heightened susceptibility to transcendence, according to Susana Garcia. Musically, this appears, for example, in a massive rolled chord that follows an obsessive ostinato in Sonata No. 7, a moment where tradition urges an accelerando, but I chose instead a steady tempo with no rubato. That insistence transforms the delirium into a trance-like, ritualistic energy. In our cross-disciplinary setting, the dancer physically enacts that delirium, spinning into a vertigo, then collapsing, while I hold the steady bells. The contrast heightens the emotional impact. Her movement gives dramatic shape to the music, and my grounded rhythm reinforces her frenzy. Together we expand the interpretive vocabulary. The dancer's embodiment frees the music to remain firm and ritualistic, while my steady pulse intensifies its obsessive power. The instance shows how embracing risk in performance, when rooted in conviction and supported by other media, can yield unconventional results. However, being grounded in a particular concept justifies the choice opted for. Scriabin writes about a concept or a sensation of not I that he believed to have created. I quote, "It is the same kind of activity within me as is that world which I consider to be exterior," I close the quote. Leia, the installations, and I do share or co-create the space, while as well sharing the also I experience in the 8th sonata. If we look at a concept opposite to the one Scriabin discusses and respectively use the opposite term for the sensation. While experiencing the also I notion struck me mentally during the cinematic version's filming process, to the point when I became concerned about how this might proceed. I learned to embrace it and was able to engage with it approximately half a year later at the performance. During the cinematic version's filming process, I have sensed Leia's stillness as a silent representation of me, which was disturbing, yet deeply unifying. The notion of Leia as an external embodiment of my own interior states reconfigured how I approached her movement. Instead of treating it as external stimuli, I recognized it as an extension of the music's psychological dimensions. Going through the phase of a deep personal discomfort of the initial sensation has allowed me to grow and experience the union with Leia as my counterpart in this piece, not only artistically in this case, however also mentally. During the performance, a moment in the recapitulation marks a turning point. I find myself more resilient to Leia's penetrating looks, which are not intimidating me anymore to the point that made me uncomfortable, as it was in the project's cinematic version. I grew in my interpretation and in my personality, mentally, artistically, and spiritually. During the performance, the role of scent was not only an atmospheric addition, but a sensory tool that aligns with and enhances the emotional and spatial dimensions of each piece. It adds a layer of interpretation that allows the performers to respond to each other in an enriched sensory, multisensory context, ultimately shaping the character and adding depth to the overall experience. A musical piece forms the perfumer's perception, while the olfaction, in turn, influences behavior, consequently enriching interpretive processes, given that musical interpretation itself is a form of expressive behavior. Therefore, Naoko Kusunoki, the perfumer, through her nuanced understanding of the characters and moods within the sonatas, translated into olfactory compositions, subtly informs my interpretive choices as a pianist when I'm performing these works on stage with the fragrance permeating the space. I find a parallel to Peter de Couper's description of his project, The Smell of a Stranger. I quote, "Take away the change in smell from this work and the context is lost. The created context here is even a statement to think about. Smell, therefore, gives meaning to the work." I close the quote. For me now, the sense of the 5 sonatas have grown into this music. I still perceive them internally whenever I play or hear these works, even if the smell is not physically present. This dynamic merges auditory and olfactory elements and establishes a strong bond across the multiple artistic media, which in turn enhances the interpretive depth due to a heightened emotional response. From a purely pianistic perspective, among the particular aspects that evolved possibly in interconnected ways as a consequence of the cross-disciplinary research, I would like to mention time, tempo, rubato, flow, pedal, chordal rolls, articulation, including attack and takeoff, phrasing, balance, and voicing, non-musical, poetic directions written in the score by the composer, symbolism and imagery through my personal cross-model perception. I would be glad to demonstrate several instances at the piano during the Q&A session in case of a further interest. Now I must move on to conclusions. The score functions as an open platform, treating Scriabin's notation as a departure point for cross-model, symbolic and dramatic incentives lets lighting cues, improvised movement, installations, and scent co-author each rendition. This confirms the premise that the score is a launch pad and not a cage. Cross-disciplinary feedback measurably reshapes interpretative decisions. In both case studies, rubato lengthened or contracted. Pedaling and touch shifted, and phrasing recalibrated the instant I tracked the dancer's movement, breath, a color change, or a presence of the installation or scent, effects never produced in solo trials. Gesture becomes a shared real-time syntax. Microsignals dictated fermata spans, chordal rolls and tempi without verbal count-offs, proving that embodied cues can replace traditional controlling anchors. Space and time are co-negotiated. Varying distance and the redrawing of visual focus by color and mist altered my lived time, while installations contributed to the spatial and semantic meaning by carving corridors or acting as parts of the self, as well as external characters in the music. Risk-taking yields new structural meanings. Accepting unpredictable cues demonstrated that calculated risk can deepen and not destabilize Scriabin's dramatic arcs. The practice-led analytic loop frames subjective experience as material for interpretation. Multicam footage, autoethnographic note-taking, stimulated recall, IPA-derived coding captured when and how those time timbre shifts arose, given phenomenological events, a reliable research trail, and allowing comparison with baseline solo versions. Live dialogue with movement, light, and scent, in a way implied by Scriabin's Omni.art, reshapes the pianist's temporal, timbral, and formal choices. Through such interpersonal collaboration, Scriabin's often theatrical performance indications are transformed from abstract signs into embodied experience, enriching interpretation not only in how musical gestures become expressions of character and life, but also in how time and timbre themselves acquire heightened gestural, dance-like, and symbolic qualities. This, in turn, shapes subsequent solo interpretation, making it more cohesive and meaningful, revealing complex layers of the inner organization of Scriabin's music. I would like to thank my artistic and technical teams for creating these projects with me, as well as my supervisors and advisors for supporting my work. A very special thank you from the bottom of my heart goes to my husband, DENIZ, for being with me during every single moment of this journey. Thank you very much, dear audience, for being here today. In a few minutes, the floor will be open for questions. I will now continue with my performance of Alexander Scriabin's last published sonata, number 10, Opus 70.
Thank you for your performance. As we can see, not only in the 10th sonata by Scriabin, this is a very challenging, a very complex and very difficult material. And you are asked to be very spontaneous during your interpretation. So it can be probably completely different tomorrow when you're playing. You can have another tempo, etc., etc. But in your project, you're working not alone. You're working with a further person. You're working with a dancer, with Lea. So my question is, how can you focus on that complex material you are playing while working simultaneously with another person and giving also the most possible attention to her? So my question is, which strategies do you use to hold this all together? It's not only wavelength, I think.
Thank you so much, Markus, for the question. And I love this question. I have been asked that at conferences sometimes. Well, it was a challenge. It always is, especially, yes, with Scriabin's music that is quite complex, I would say, even for a solo performance. Luckily, we had the first case study, and I showed the example, this small example, but I gave the entire presentation on that case study during my mid-study exam. We had to, of course, use our eyesight a lot to follow each other. But yes, I do have to watch the keyboard, and she has to also watch a lot of other things, the space and so on. And with time, well, that happened during the course of just a few days, I realized that I was learning how to also track her by activating my other senses. So I hear her, and I can already differentiate, for example, even things like if she's sliding or she's jumping, and I can trace her character already and respond. Or actually, if I decide to pursue a different goal, then I maybe do not deliberately respond, and then she responds to me at some point. So we use, of course, the peripheral vision a lot, and we use hearing, and we do exchange glances whenever it's possible. For example, during very complex section, of course, I cannot look at her all the time. Sometimes I can only track her or sort of orient myself through her movement in this space. So I also had to learn a lot kinesthetically by following her in the way that was new to me. And when I can track her visually, audibly, in some way, these moments, they become very important anchor points, and they determine a lot temporally, timbrally, even for things such as pedal changes, for example, could be. Am I allowed to show more video examples? Is this true? Yes, because I think I have spare ones that unfortunately could not go in, but maybe I can now quickly, out of the spare ones, find something. Actually, maybe this one. This is a fast section of Sonata number 7. And there are a few instances when I look at her for a very brief moment, pretty much during longer chords or fermatas or things like that. But then I track when is she going to proceed, or am I proceeding first? And that helps me determine my decisions.
Elina, I hear you live for the first time today, and I meet you for the first time, although I've been your advisor, on distance, and your presence on stage is fantastic. So I enjoy very much hearing my favorite Scriabin sonata, and maybe your favorite as well. Very good, and as Markus said, you are very free today, and you become more free, more and more free during this project. As you know, there are things that I've been surprised about in your choices, because when you endeavor to make a multimedial performance of the Scriabin sonatas, you are thinking in direction of the mystery, his ultimate work, right? Including also the sense, and that's fantastic. That is groundbreaking work, you know. I don't know about anything who has done this, but at the point of departure of his, I would say, multimedial voyage, there was this synesthetical connection between harmony and color. Yeah. And I feel you have neglected that aspect a little bit in your project, and you have limited yourself to the projection of one main color in each sonata, whereas the harmony is changing. So you could have done other choices here, I'm sure. I wonder why you kind of deprioritized the color changes inside the sonatas. Is that a question you could?
Thank you, HÅKON, for the question. Let's see. Well, that's a huge topic, and of course I have thought about it a lot. And in the beginning, I did have an idea of following the harmony more closely, and I realized that it would be great. It would be really easy to get carried away with the requirements, and that would mean reconstructing or taking the same idea as what Scriabin has for Prometheus. He did not, of course, write the light-colored part for the sonatas, but we would my team and I would then go into those footsteps, and he writes harmonic changes in the score very often, I must say. Sometimes more than once per measure. It's, of course, very close to Prometheus. The opuses are right there, all between 60 and 70. So this is his style. And then it probably would mean that I would not be able to actually work with the other genres, but we would just be replicating what we have in Prometheus, historically reconstructing Scriabin's vision, putting the colors into the sonatas, which is an amazing project, I think, and it probably maybe was already done. I did not see videos myself of such a close correspondence. Maybe it's being in production now, I don't know, by someone, which probably must be done, or was done, or should be done at some point. But I realized that it would probably mean that we would stop at that. And my goal was to, of course, explore multiple genres. And I discussed the approach with my lighting designers. We decided to use one or two colors as a base for each sonata deliberately in order for the light to support me and Leia. And if the light would change constantly, and there was imagining now if we have had an unlimited budget and unlimited timing, we would have had sense and installations. It could be really overwhelming for all of us, because you cannot have 5 artistic genres that are very equal. Since we decided that music and dance will be main genres for this project, and the rest will be supportive in a way, because again, it's Leia who decides what to do with installations. They luckily or unfortunately don't walk or dance on their own, maybe again in another project, we will see. But installations, scent, and light served more as a supportive base for more active components to take place, for the music that harmonically changes frequently, that, the texturally changes frequently, dynamically, and Leia's movement, and our dynamics. So again, due to the time constraints, because coding, mapping and coding, even 25 minutes of Prometheus that we did was 30 hours in the whole or something like that, and the sonatas last 66, and there is no score. So it would just be a completely different, probably wonderful project. Maybe someone did it or does it.
It would. You could have solved that, making choices of which color changes would be important and which not, because there are large sections in each sonata with contrasting tonality, right? I accept, your choices, and you have achieved very beautiful results.
Thank you.
I have a question that directly follows. So in your dissertation and your presentation today, you show such a sensitivity to details of Alexander Scriabin's biography, his conception of the Mysterium, and of course then the musical scores. But again, I understand that you made a set of creative decisions that were perhaps less closely tied to these historical materials, and the decision whether the lights are tracking the harmonic changes or not, that's a big decision. So how does a historical understanding enrich your performance? So that's the first part of the question. And then how do you choose which ideas to incorporate into contemporary practice? And then what is a performer's responsibility towards their sources? And so the first two questions I want to get at questions of process. So how do you choose, right? And then the last one is, what is your responsibility? That's a more philosophical question.
Thank you very much for the question, Anna. I did a lot of reading, and as you know, I'm very imaginative by nature myself, and that I'm very visual. That helps me in my work. Maybe sometimes it actually doesn't help me in my work, who knows? Maybe it distracts me. But this is one of the reasons why this project happened. When I read, or when I listen to something, or when I play, I see things for myself somehow internally. And when I started working with Leia, we discussed a lot about the characters in Scriabin. So we discussed all the miniature titles. The first project is on 20 short pieces. Each of them has a character title, quite precise, I would say. And there was background reading that I have done that opens up some of these characters more. And that was very helpful. So Leia and I discussed these things, and we were arriving, during our research sessions, we were arriving at some conclusions together, maybe. Sometimes, for example, maybe she would say, actually, if this is this such and such character, I might start in a certain corner of the room. And that would already give me an incentive. Okay, that's a corner, so not a center. So maybe my sound should somehow correspond to that idea of the space. Maybe she's trying to hide. Maybe she will unwrap the character later. How can I follow her? So somehow we did not really select or reject things on purpose, unless technically there was something totally unavailable to us, or not possible to make within the timing constraints or budget constraints. But otherwise, it was during the creative work that we researched, or even during the light intensity. Sometimes we thought, maybe something would be too dark, or maybe something would be too much, or the change would be, for example, no strobe lighting, so that change would be too frequent. That could be dangerous. So some other decisions that we rejected, just because we also were looking for what organically fits into the framework of this project from a contemporary perspective. So I did not have a strict process of writing down a list and then canceling out or crossing out some things. But during the years, during the discussions, this just somehow formed artistically, I would say, intuitively, because yes, my method is a discovery-oriented research method after all. And for me, it was important also that everyone felt that what we were doing was right for this project. For example, during the performance, before the performance, we had 5 scent machines, and one of them was directly behind me, so on stage. And I really would love to have more of the smell's intensity, but Leah said, maybe we could actually turn it down, because it would be too much for me. I am dancing, I'm breathing. And sadly, we had to turn that machine slightly down. So that was one of the decisions, maybe due to which some of the audience members did not get that amount of scent as initially planned in the first rows, for example. So some of the decisions had to be adapted on the go, and we just had to stay open. So yes, there was no rigid framework. A constant discussion, a constant contemplation. Of course, I do not claim that my method is the only correct one in such a study. It could be done differently, very differently, and I absolutely accept that. This is what has taken place now during these few years, and to me, it seems that I have a feeling it fits quite organically. And I do not say that of course, if it would be another project historically recreated, that it would not work. Of course it would. It would just be a different approach.
And I'm also thinking about the score as a historical source, right? So include the score. So what would you say, philosophically, a performer's responsibility is towards historical sources?
Yes, thank you for reiterating the question. I think a performer has a double fidelity because there is, on the one hand, the fidelity to the historical material and the interpretational traditions. If we listen to Scriabin's own recordings, for example, or his contemporaries, they sound very differently from how his works are, I don't want to say executed, played now, because again, everyone plays them differently, but there are certain notions that do change and evolve in the interpretational traditions over time. So now we, collectively, maybe I would say we play very differently. So getting acquainted with what, luckily, what the composer sounded like, and we have that material, at least partially restored, and following some of his decisions, that is already one part, and that was actually so unclear to me in the beginning. I was so surprised how Scriabin plays his own works. To me, it seemed to be very unusual. And I think by the end of my project, it seemed so natural, as if I just have heard this all the time, and it seemed right. Somehow, some things just clicked. It's very hard to put it into words, but they just come with time. Another part, another fidelity is the fidelity to the present moment, because there are newer performance traditions, interpretational traditions, and again, they're not rigid, they are evolving constantly. And this becomes very interesting. Because when entering the field of cross-disciplinary collaborations, certain interpretational laws or standards, if I may, maybe change, or maybe they expand. This is what I'm convinced such an interpretation might not necessarily even conform to the contemporary notions. So this is just another field that could be based partially on historical knowledge and partially on the contemporary traditions, but then something, a third style, if I may say, emerges, so it's neither historical nor contemporary. It is completely something different due to the interpersonal collaborative dynamics that takes place during the project.
Okay, yeah. Elina, wow. I've heard you play a few times during the years that you have been working on this project. And I remember very well the very first time I've heard you play. And it's worlds between, you were already a fantastic pianist at the time, and I still think it's worlds between then and now. And even I've heard you play last week, and now things are continuously developing, maturing, deepening, and getting more, let's say, not just daring, but, well, radical is also not the right word, just more consequential. Yes, more consequential. So thank you for your presentation, for your playing. So my interest is very much in what you've achieved rather than what you didn't achieve. A lot of what you've achieved has to do with how you worked with the dancer. So during the process of working in this project, I remember you started out at the very beginning of the doctoral work more with this idea of the production. Yeah, like it just you know, you had your ideas, what you wanted to do, and you just wanted to be the person who does that and the team to do what you want to do. That was kind of the very beginning. It's completely changed throughout this project, and you've really succeeded in a true collaborative work. And the central part of that collaboration, of course, the scent work was also very important. But what I felt was of central significance also to, you know, part of what the discoveries that you were talking about has to do with the dance. So with this dialogue with the dance, and that's why that's where my question is heading. Your approach to time, to working with time, has changed during these sessions, those first miniature sessions, working in the lab with Leah, profoundly. So you've come across a sense of rubato, which I haven't heard before, except when I heard the Scriabin pianola rolls. And I've heard those rolls. I've heard those rolls because I play these works, and I've listened to a lot. I've heard these piano rolls of Scriabin playing, and they were always mysterious in the way that he dealt with time. It was really like, how does he do this? Yeah, and it seems like you're now able to do this. And it seems like it's a consequence of your working with the dancer in this kind of responsive situation. So I think there is, in my own understanding of what's happened, is there's sort of an internal dancer in this music, in Scriabin's approach to composing, in what he wanted this music to, hopefully this time it's appropriate to say, embody. And many people, many pianists that I've heard, dozens of interpretations, dozens of pianists, if not hundreds, ignore this completely in their sense of rubato, in their sense of timing. Now, my actual question is, because I do want to würdigen, acknowledge this achievement, my actual question is, has your approach to time changed in other repertoire? As a consequence of this, because if you're saying, well, you know, something has changed, it's not just a personal thing, I've really understood something fundamental about dealing with time in interpretation and with rubato in particular. Has this somehow found an application in other repertoire? For example, in trio or quartet works that you've been playing, or even in solo work? That would be my main question, actually.
Thank you very much, Deniz, for everything you have said, really, and for this question. Right now, I would say it's not so easy for me to judge because I'm still in the framework of this project. And what happened here happened to me organically, I would say. So if I'm playing other repertoire, it's not easy for me to say, oh, now I'm playing this differently because of the Scriabin Sonatas project or the miniatures project. Maybe I am. Maybe I will be able to tell in a few years. But I think what it has given me in terms of the time, and I would say not only, is not being afraid of certain unconventional interpretational risks. Maybe one would say, you don't play like this. But I'm thinking, what if I give it a try? And during my chamber collaborations, since I'm thinking with the same brain and I'm working with the same mind and my perception, I think it also has that type of an effect because I cannot suddenly switch the approach completely since I have learned all these things. So yes, just going for an unconventional version in a way and seeing how that could work. And definitely what I now have in my arsenal is just a greater variety of choice of what I can do with the musical work. And there are so many things that there's always a danger. There are so many things one could do, and then they might or might not make sense together in a certain combination. So I always, it's walking the edge of the knife. I always try to think whether something would make sense, not just on its own, but in combination with the other factors, even rubato, because there might be a certain amount of rubato that would make sense for a particular section, but then one must adjust the neighboring sections, for example. Otherwise, things just get out of control. So I think this work has given me the ability to look at a piece, especially now with the sonatas. I know them quite well, I allow myself to say, and tracking whether things make sense for me, at least personally, artistically, musically, spiritually as well, since this is Scriabin's music. Because if they don't, they are definitely not going to make sense for anyone. And I would not need to play a piece that does not make sense for me, meaning my interpretation would not make sense for me. So of course, I have more choice in approaching not only specific aspects, but also in combining them together. And I have more experience now of putting things with a greater variety and being able to spontaneously perhaps also change some things on the go or follow if I'm working with a dancer or with a light or with a scent. Follow the other artistic medium and allow that medium create an effect, give me an impact, give me an incentive. So that definitely does transfer into my approach for any piece that I play. I would say so, indeed, because there is the interpersonal dynamics in the room, and since we did not choreograph on purpose, Leia is improvising all the time, and I'm sure if I'm lucky to ever work with her again, she would improvise again. You never know what the other person would come up with. So you have your own perception, and you have the reaction of someone to your perception, and that is the moment when the magic happens. I tried to be short.
Yeah.
experience and practice. That matters, seriously. Because I remember myself when I did my first project in 2016. It was music, photography, and theater. And I was so inspired and so distracted. I practiced my pieces a lot, and that really, really helped me. And then the further I went, the more I realized that the stability, the grounding is important, and getting used to the unexpected. I was really distracted when we started the work on the SONATA project, this one, the cinematic version. And that was my 6th cross-disciplinary project. So I've been working in for a decade in this genre. So the light artists first tested something, and we just rehearsed. And then they activated the fog machine. I could not see anything. I could not see the keyboard. It was, the fog was right here. I did not know what I was playing. Everything was blue, then red, then I don't know. And Leia was everywhere, and I was just getting extremely distracted. So what matters is getting used to the idea that things are unpredictable, trying rehearsing in different circumstances, in uncomfortable circumstances as well, because you never know what might come out. My only condition during the live performance of the sonatas was that I have the light on the keyboard. I didn't really care about the rest. But yes, and just practicing working in cross-disciplinary context, starting smaller maybe, and just developing and developing. So banal, but it's true. Practice helps. Thank you.